Jesus Christ the Refugee. We take our annual time to thwart that ridiculous, nonsensical argument continually pushed by libs about this time every single year. And speaking of refugees, travel bans have been instituted by the Trump administration. Those look good. And what percentage of the world are we restricting from coming to the United States? Actually, an unbelievably small percentage. Europe is in decline. Some people think that is a good thing. And the swag gap. Actually, really interesting piece in the Wall Street Journal talking about clothing and dating. All that more coming up on this episode of Turning Point tonight. My name is Joe Bob. Thanks so much for tuning in. Together, we are charting the course of America's cultural comeback. This is Turning Point tonight. Obviously, before we get to any of those stories, you got to send along our emails. tpt@tpusa.com is the email address if you'd like to send along your thoughts, comments, concerns, criticisms. I can already foresee a flood of emails coming in, not necessarily in disagreement, but in, oh my gosh, these people continue to push this whole Jesus was a refugee, therefore we shouldn't have borders in the United States. Obviously, I think many of you will agree with our whole dismantling of that. I almost said a naughty word. Really bad idea. tpt@tpusa.com. Again, remember, if your email is gross, vile, disgusting, bigoted, vitriolic, it'll actually fit in great with what we do here on this show. So send it along, tpt@tpusa.com. We'll get to some of those emails in the mailbag segment of the show. Also, go subscribe to our Turning Point Tonight YouTube channel, which is growing by leaps and bounds, especially in time for the holiday season. You don't want to be sitting around the Christmas dinner table not knowing what is going up on the Turning Point Tonight social media accounts. The hack is Joe Bob, J-O-B-O-B, very ridiculous name. Advantageous, though, when it comes to finding things. Just type in J-O-B-O-B on any of your social media platforms. You'll be able to find all of the online and even the online exclusive content from Turning Point Tonight, which includes our segment that we do every single day that has nothing to do with what's going on the show because there's too much to talk about to fit in our time here on Real America's Voice. And with that, let's get to it. It seems that almost every year around Christmas time, a bunch of libs come out and make the argument, well, Jesus was a refugee. All right, well, here goes our annual disassemblement of that ridiculous and nonsensical argument. This year specifically, the argument is coming from the police chief in Minneapolis. A guy named Brian O'Hara took to the microphone and decided to invoke, well, Jesus was a refugee, and therefore all of the illegal immigrants that are coming into our country, the criminals and otherwise, should be treated the same way Jesus was treated. We'll get to dispelling all of that in just a little bit, but let's watch this clip from, again, the police chief, Brian O'Hara. Check this out, cut 6.
It's especially personal to me, having been raised a Catholic, to be in a Christian church this morning as we are approaching Christmas. And I cannot help but think of what is happening in our city today and how that echoes with how outsiders have been treated for thousands of years. How Mary and Joseph themselves were considered outsiders and forced to stay in a barn. That's what we're getting ready to commemorate as Christians around the world, while all of this fear is happening right here in our town.
Yes, in the nativity story in Matthew, the innkeeper says, nope, you can't stay here because you're outsiders. Not because the inn is full and I have a stable over here that you can go to if you'd like. Nope, it's because the innkeeper was racist. That's why Jesus was born in a manger. And there's a lot to get through here. First of all, the comment, as I was raised Catholic, okay, raised doesn't mean you still are, and there's no evidence to show that he actually still is a practicing Christian, so let's just go ahead and dispel of that whole thing. Also to keep in mind, police chiefs are appointed. Sheriffs are actually elected. There's a big difference there. This guy was appointed by the city leadership there in Minneapolis, and, well, as evidenced by his short, little ridiculous speech, you can probably tell why. He agrees with the woke ideology of the leadership there in Minneapolis. He was not voted in by the populace as sheriffs are. Also, broad reports suggest this guy is married to a Muslim. So there's that. So there's a lot of different things going on here, including the fact of the whole idea is Mary and Joseph were forced into a barn because of discrimination, effectively. Now there's a lot of things to talk about in this vein. I'm going to try to keep it as concise as possible. There was a great article by a guy named Alex Kochman, who kind of refutes all of this sort of stuff. So we're going to be kind of pulling from that. But again, you could probably do an entire 3-hour podcast on this. So we're going to try and keep it as short and concise as possible. But it is interesting information to know, especially in case this sort of thing gets thrown at you at Christmas dinner. You want to be prepared and understand, hey, here are some of the massive differences with Jesus's story and criminally illegal rapists that are coming into the country that for some reason libs want to keep in the country. Every Christmas, it seems that the Jesus is a refugee claim is made to justify illegal immigration. They cite Matthew 2, where Joseph and Mary fled to Egypt. If you're not familiar with the nativity story there, Herod says, well, we're going to kill all of the boys in Bethlehem under 2. God comes to Joseph in a dream. He says, you got to get out of the area. Mary, Joseph flee to Egypt rather than be, obviously have Jesus killed. They stay there for somewhere between 3 and 4 years, not entirely sure, until Herod the Great dies, which, by the way, is different than Herod Antipas. I ran into somebody who kind of thought the Herods in the biblical story is the same Herod. It's not. It does make that clear in the Bible that obviously Herod the Great dies. King Herod Antipas, who is the Tetrarch of Galilee at the time, is also present in Jesus' crucifixion story, the whole trial there with Pontius Pilate, but different Herods. Okay, it's just, I don't know why I felt the need to throw that in, but I ran across somebody who thought it was the same Herod. So anyways, let's see. Here are some of the big differences with Mary, Joseph, and Jesus fleeing to Egypt and seeking refuge in Egypt to avoid having their son be killed in Bethlehem. Jesus and his family actually remained within the boundaries of the Roman Empire. I mean, that's big number one. That is like you're a refugee or seeking refuge from, I don't know, Pittsburgh in Columbus, Ohio, right? That is different than coming from Haiti to Denver, Colorado. Again, totally different. Or Somalia to Minneapolis, Minnesota. If you're within the same dominion there, if you're in the Roman Empire, it isn't really equivalent in any way, shape, or form. So there's that. Mary, Joseph, and Jesus retained their national identity and returned home as soon as the threat was gone. As soon as Herod the Great dies, Joseph and Mary bring Jesus back to where he was. Now, I will say this. If there was a direct relationship with that, with what Jesus' family did and what the modern refugees did, I would approve. I would say, cool. Threat seems to be gone. Go back home. Adios. Bye-bye. We can get into a bunch of different policy points on how possible that is and all that sort of stuff, and we will in a little bit. But there's massive differences on that front. Now, jump to today and how refugee status and immigration into the country is handled completely and entirely differently than the story that libs try to use to justify, again, rampant immigration into the United States. According to the Immigration and Nationality Act, a refugee is defined as someone outside the country who cannot return due to persecution based on race, religion, nationality, membership of a social group, or political opinion. In 2024, by that definition, the United States admitted a total of 100,000 refugees in that definition category. 37,000 of those principal refugees, the ones with the direct threat to them, and then another 63,000 derivative refugees who are related to those principal refugees, totaling 100,000. So if you're going to make the argument, look at all of these illegal immigrants are coming into this country, they're just the same as Jesus. Okay, by definition, from a refugee standpoint, it's only 100,000. I'm not sure if everybody on the left is familiar with the illegal immigration statistics, but there's quite a bit more than 100,000 in the country at the moment. Tens of millions, probably. So, okay, that whole thing is there in and of itself. The refugee admission number, by the total number of Immigrants, both legal and illegal, completely is dwarfed by the overwhelming amount of people coming into the country illegally, so that negates that point in and of itself if you're just trying to use refugee as an actual definitional term. When it comes to actually the permanence of those people coming to that country, remember, Mary, Joseph, Jesus go back. They leave Egypt after Herod is dead. They leave, where did I say? Columbus, Ohio, and go back to Pittsburgh, again, remaining in the same nation state. So there's that. After Herod dies. And like I said, if we're going to make a direct correlation and then say, okay, so once it's safe to return home, go home. Oh, I'm actually kind of for that. Among the individuals granted asylum in the United States, fewer than 2% actually return to their countries of origin. Those eligible, approximately 83% of former refugees eventually end up becoming U.S. citizens through the naturalization process, which is a rate higher than any other legal immigrant category. In other words, if you're going to be a refugee in the United States, chances are you stay here for the entirety of your life. Why? Because the United States is just better. Like, objectively. If you had to leave a country as a refugee, the country that you're coming to, the United States, is objectively better. So there's that massive difference. Also, it goes without saying that the number of people that are naturalized citizens who are refugees from other countries overwhelmingly vote for more open, porous borders so that they can bring the rest of their family from the God-forsaken hellhole that they came from. And so that's part of the reason why libs don't want this sort of thing, because once they become naturalized citizens, they end up voting for the left, which is, bad in and of itself. Now, when it comes to the overall scriptural basis, scripture clearly commands justice and kindness towards immigrants, passersby, sojourners. Exodus talks about this, Leviticus talks about this, Deuteronomy talks about this. And also, national borders, also ordained by God in Genesis, Acts, in accordance with natural law. What the scripture in Exodus and Deuteronomy and Leviticus doesn't say is that, well, anybody who makes it into your geographical vicinity all of a sudden is 100% bought into what you in fact are doing, and therefore are a fully cooperative citizen of that country. That doesn't say that. And also, within that, borders are a thing. Nation states are a thing. Groups of people are a thing. Just because you're geographically within the proximity of a certain group, biblically, but also now, just because you're in the United States, doesn't mean you've adapted to the culture, doesn't mean you've learned the language, doesn't mean you understand the customs and the culture of the country. And therefore, you could probably make a stronger biblical argument to say, all right, come here, you got to wait 3 generations before you can officially become a U.S. citizen. I'm not necessarily making that argument right now, but I'm saying, biblically, you probably can. Now, just to wrap this up, and again, I know there's so much more that you can get to, but in the limited amount of time, we want to make sure we, try and get all the most important points. I want to just read verbatim from this article again from a guy, Alex Kochman. I'm going to read his conclusion. In the end, Matthew 2 calls us to trust God's providence, not to hijack the Messiah's infancy for policy sloganeering. Christ's temporary flight to Egypt fulfilled prophecy and secured our redemption. It did not offer a blueprint for immigration legislation. The church must show compassion, and the state must exercise prudence, and Christians must keep those obligations distinct. Only then can we honor both the integrity of the nations God has ordained and the mission of the gospel he has entrusted to his people. Outside of all of this, again, I think the argument is pretty clearly made. Outside of all this, I think the one thing that I've noticed is just so true when it comes to the way people think is the argument that Thomas Sowell makes in A Conflict of Visions. If you haven't read that book, it's fantastic. You probably can get the gist of it if you just read the first chapter. It's very, very dense and somewhat difficult to understand. But his main point, his main thesis there is people who live their lives with constraint and people who live their lives unconstrained. More, I don't know, easier way to define that is probably internal and then external. Meaning that if you look at Scripture, if you look at the Bible, if you look at your relationship with God as something that affects you internally, that generally leads to conservative values, traditional principles. I need to take care of me first. And if I'm good, if my household is good, if my family is good, if my children are good, and we internally make changes within ourselves, then that generally leads to better outcomes. On the other hand, if you're unconstrained, if everything is external and you try to apply internal factors to an external world, that's where you get chaos. I don't know if Thomas Sowell specifically makes that argument. He's more kind of describing the constrained life versus the unconstrained life. But overall, this is what's going on here. Libs try to take the Bible and Scripture, which is supposed to be directed internally to you to help you figure out your life and the best path forward in the way that God sees best fit, versus a bunch of libs who try to take 2,000-year-old Scripture completely out of context and apply it to the modern world, which is not how any of this was designed to work. Whew. 16 minutes. It's actually okay. Again, we could probably go on for this for like 3 hours and have a very long discussion about this. But the main point being made here is, yeah, this continues to happen pretty much every Christmas. They cite, well, Jesus was a refugee in Egypt. So within the same nation state, they still kept their national identity. Nothing of that changed. So completely and entirely different, and yet libs continue every single year to try and make this point, to which we should all, roll our eyes, but also understand the very, very glaring differences and make sure that, you've got that at your fingertips if the conversation ever comes up in real life. Speaking of other countries, Europe obviously is in massive decline, but there was a really, really fascinating, but also terrifying opinion piece in the New York Times saying that Europe is in decline. Good. I thought that was too good of a headline. I have to read this. And parts of that article are, again, disturbing, terrifying, but also hilarious that real life first world people think this sort of thing. You're not going to want to miss that. Also, the travel ban instituted by the Trump administration. Oh no, it's the worst thing in the world if you're the libs, but also if you look at the actual numbers and statistics, it affects a very, very small population of the entire globe. And what is the swag gap? On a more kind of fundamental intercultural relationship that we have with each other, it's actually very, very interesting. Gen Z and the way that they dress and what that says about individuals as they enter into relationships. Very, very interesting. tpt@tpusa.com if you'd like to send along your thoughts, comments, concerns, criticisms. I know we probably missed some factors there when we're talking about Jesus as a refugee. Remember, we have a limited amount of time, but also feel free to send those along. tpt@tpusa.com. Also, go subscribe to our Turning Point Tonight YouTube channel. This is our last kind of real episode of the year. Tomorrow, America Fest, Friday, America Fest. Not entirely sure what the programming there is going to be. Either the event will still be going, or myself and some friends will be on the Rav set, kind of recapping the day. So this is the last time we'll be together like this in this scenario before the year's end. There's going to be some really interesting changes coming in the new year, which I think are all positive, all for the good, and all to continue to pursue the conservative mission, Charlie's mission, to take back this country for conservative and traditional values. But just thought I'd mention that. Really appreciate you sticking around, tuning in. We'll talk more after the break. Don't go away. We'll be right back after this. This is, oh man, let me grab that again and get you a graphic that we can look at while it's happening. Man in rainbow cape with his friends laughing as if they're doing something. This is actually a thing that I think I've been looking at, I don't know, a lot nowadays, kind of piggybacking on our kind of internal and external discussion. Libs get together and like to pretend that they're happy. And it's really kind of telling because they need to do that sort of thing, right? If you're living your life in a way, debaucherous sort of lifestyle where things are chaotic because you're not aligning what you do in the real world with reality, then you kind of have to do this sort of thing, laughing yoga, to pretend that there is actual joy in substitute for, real joy, having a family, participating in your church, having kids, doing all the things that you're supposed to do. If you're not doing any of those sorts of things, you will feel empty inside. You will feel a void. And the way that libs try to fill that void is going to laughter yoga and pretending to synthesize joy. Outward expressions of the body are really, again, just expressions of what you're feeling internally. If you try to synthesize that by just exhibiting the outward stuff, by just laughing because you're being told to laugh, is not actual happiness, not actual joy. When you internalize that sort of stuff, you don't need to do this. None of you would go to a laughter yoga session because probably, hopefully, you have an internal fulfillment, you have internal peace, and therefore none of this is necessary. All this is a way to try and synthesize the joy that we actually probably really feel, hopefully, and say, no, it's all the same. We're laughing just as much as you. I beg to differ on a lot of different reasons. Dang it, we probably could go into a very long thing about that, but I do want to get to this article from the New York Times, this opinion piece about Europe is in decline, good. This article was written by a guy named Anton Jaeger, and he's a 31-year-old, by all accounts, probably a socialist. There's a lot of, just for time, I don't necessarily know that we want to get into all this. There's a bunch of statistics here that I wanted to throw at you. The European economy is experiencing stagnation. The GDP growth has slowed. It's like 1 to 1.3%, which is far below the global forecast, which estimated approximately about 3%. GDP relative to the United States has fallen sharply. A bunch of Europe's biggest economies, Germany specifically, faced a prolonged crisis with their industrial production forecast in decline. All of these different things. I think what we can agree on here, and I think we have all these statistics specifically to outline the point that Europe is actually in decline, and that's before we talk about all of the rampant immigration coming into a bunch of European countries, the UK specifically. We've talked about all the people going into there and changing the British culture and society. France, obviously, we talked about earlier this week, them canceling their parade because a bunch of the freaking migrant crime that's going on. They just said, we surrender. We don't actually want to deal with this. Point being said is that it's pretty universally accepted that Europe is in decline. I, and probably you and everybody watching this show, thinks that's a bad thing. I think Europe should stand up for their Western values. I think they should try the best they can to fight back, but not everybody shares that sentiment. And this guy, particularly, is one. Again, a guy named Anton Jaeger says that Europe is in decline, good, writing in the New York Times opinion piece. I'm going to read 3 different excerpts from this article, rather lengthy, but interesting nonetheless, and kind of juxtapose how he views the world versus how all of us probably view the world. Again, these are exact quotes. All of this sounds menacing. He's talking about the decline in Europe as well. All of this sounds menacing to Europeans, yet perhaps the demotion of Europe needs not to be traumatic. Rather, a reckoning with European decline, culture, political, and all of the above economic, could give rise to a healthily modest approach to the present. In other words, we should be happy that Europe is declining economically, culturally, in all of the different ways. After a century in which Europe was in charge with highly ambitious results, it might even free Europeans of the burden of neurosis of mastery. In other words, the way that we do things at a masterful level really is such a shame. Maybe we should accept decline and things being worse because that will ultimately be better for the world. The article goes on. What is needed is a new politics of decline, to borrow a phrase from a historian, yada, 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 one that looks both inward and outward. Internally, this guy from the New York Times is saying, not from the New York Times, it's an opinion piece in the New York Times. I think I already mentioned that. Internally, it requires a break with the austerity fetish that has gripped European policymakers since the 1990s. Yeah, austerity is needed if your social programs are overbloated. You need to roll it back. France is dealing with this predominantly right now. I think they're on their like fourth economic minister in Macron's presidency, fifth economic one, because in France, like you can retire at 55 with like 120% of your salary and take like 5 months of vacation. Don't quote me on that, but it's just an unbelievable amount of vacation. But it's an austerity fetish. That's what's going on in Europe, according to this dude. It is with good reason that the economic historian castigated the EU technocrats as the Taliban of neoliberalism for their intransigent attachment to market principles in the age that has declared them obsolete. In other words, the old economic principles are completely obsolete. We don't need supply and demand anymore. We should just accept the fact that we as Europeans are declining. Jettisoning this dogma is crucial. Loosening the fiscal rules for member states would facilitate economic catch-up. Wrong. On the back of serious strategic public investment. What he's saying, in highfalutin New York Times words, is we need socialism. Because all of the economic free market principles, those are just outdated. They're obsolete now. What we need is the government to plan the economy, because that works all the time. And his globalist mindset becomes ever more clear now. And some of the assertions made here are beyond hilarious. He says, if Europe is to reinvent itself, it must think in more heterodox ways. Mostly, it will have to contemplate something considered to be beyond the pale in Brussels. He's writing from Brussels. Critical integration with China. Okay, all right. So now he's calling with full-blown integration with the communist Chinese. Critical is meant in both sense of the term. On one hand, the engagement is vitally necessary to fight against climate change, an effort mostly led by China. Oh my gosh. A real person who is a lecturer at Oxford writing an opinion piece in the world's most respected newspaper, deservedly or not, that's just the reality of the New York Times, says that China is leading the world in green energy to fight climate change. Is he aware that every number that China puts out is a bold-faced lie? Are the libs aware that China, yes, pretends, hey, we are fighting to lessen emissions while also building more coal plants than anybody in the world, all of the globe combined? Are they aware that China just lies about things? I guess, who takes China seriously when it comes, well, sorry, not seriously, literally when it comes to their own press releases? Yes, China is doing all of the things to help the world, when in reality, they stick to none of their promises. So there's that. Let me see. And just to close this out, because I know this is probably a lot, I'm getting kind of lightheaded, angry about this. He says, it should also be conditional, involving neither submission to Beijing nor blindness to the grim record on trade and labor rights. So, don't worry about any of that sort of stuff. We still have to get involved with China. Export controls where necessary can go together with cooperation. In other words, Europeans will totally be able to cooperate with the Chinese Communist government. I mainly bring this to you to kind of outline how people actually think about the world. It's not that I think any of you would be, victim to this sort of thought process. It really is just to illuminate the fact that allegedly respected Oxford lecturers who write opinion pieces in the New York Times think that China is the good guy and we should assimilate to the Chinese culture and the way of doing things. He says, of course, we shouldn't, neglect the slavery that they have in China. We shouldn't neglect them, but we still should cooperate with them on a more base level, because they have things figured out. They have a centrally planned economy, and they're the ones who are leading the fight on climate change. It would be more hilarious if it wasn't so terrifying, but I think we should all be aware that this is a real problem that is being pushed by real people in real publications, trying to get a more globalist agenda and trying to get the West to accept its decline on the world stage. It is not something that we should accept. It's not something that Europe should accept. And for the love of God, it should not be accepted as a mindset here. We need to be aware that people are out there like this saying this sort of stuff. And therefore, we need to combat it with everything we have to ensure that the systems that built Western civilization don't deteriorate any further, because they're almost past the point of recognition in so many places around the world, most specifically Europe. I got to wrap this up because we're droning on a little bit too long. But again, I really, really, really think this is very important. Coming up next, some insight into the travel ban of the Trump administration. Just how big is this travel ban that the libs are just losing their minds over? Spoiler alert, not very big. TPT at tpusa.com if you'd like to send along your thoughts, comments, concerns. How can we best continue to defend Western ideas, Western virtue, all of the things that the Western societies have built and can hopefully try to continue to maintain? TPT at tpusa.com. Also go subscribe to our Turning Point Tonight YouTube channel, growing by leaps and bounds, Rumble, X, Instagram, all the social media accounts. Just type in JOBOB. You'll be able to find us pretty much anywhere. We'll be right back after the break. Don't go away.
I'm pissed at Amy Schumer's weight loss. She dropped 50 pounds. She was the face of body positivity, which is a movement to accept your body no matter what it looks like, and it rails against unfair expectations on women and what they're supposed to look like. I mean, she made bread on that movement. But she puts up this hot photo and deletes all the old photos of her old body. And then she wasn't wearing her wedding ring in the photo, because apparently her and her husband are having problems because she told us that. Her husband's autistic. She talks about that a lot too. If she ends up with a non-autistic guy, that's going to be another major betrayal. All these starlets, they got all this fame and all this money talking about body positivity, and then GLP-1s come out and they all get skinny, which is totally classist, by the way, and unsafe. We don't know what those GLP-1s do long term.
Come on, guys. Come on, let's go. Let's go.
Based? So this is this comedian that just goes up and complains to random people, but he's also entirely true. It's entirely correct. Yeah, Amy Schumer's body positively. By the way, I'm gonna lose a bunch of weight. And also, too, he's right. The libs just totally demonize those people. Remember when Adele lost a bunch of weight and people were like, "Oh my gosh, you're not fat anymore. This is terrible." Even. Not exactly in front of the show here, but Lizzo did the same thing. Lost a bunch of, good for her, by the way. This is fantastic. Now, I don't know if she did it with GLP-1s, diets, all of that stuff notwithstanding. Great. I think that's good. People turning their lives around. But yeah, the libs take that as like a serious form of betrayal. Oh my gosh, how could this person lose weight? The autistic husband stuff is very funny too. That should be another betrayal to the community. Speaking of betrayal, countries around the globe continue to betray Western. I'm not entirely sure if this is a good tie-in. Tried to like tie everything in together. I don't know if this one works. Countries around the world betraying Western values, but I guess it's not necessarily betrayal if they didn't believe in them anyway. But because other countries around the world don't hold the Western values that we hold dear in this country, another travel ban going into effect. Trump extended the travel ban and restrictions to include an additional 20 countries, to which I and everybody watching probably says yes. Back in June of 2025, the Trump administration initially banned citizens from 12 countries and placed restrictions on 7 others. The policy resurrected a hallmark policy in Trump 1, now being put into place in Trump 2. Obviously, this is all following the arrest of the suspected shooter of the National Guard over Thanksgiving weekend. The Trump administration is now doubling the numbers to affected countries by adding 20 more nations and the Palestinian Authority to the travel ban list. The new restrictions take effect on January 1st. Officials, the Trump administration, and this is from the AP, by the way, so they're not very charitable here, cite widespread corruption, fraudulent, and unbelievable civil documents and criminal records that make it difficult to vet citizens of other nations, which they say like, oh, the officials are saying these are the reasons. That's actually pretty good reasons. Pretty good reasons. If you're coming from a country that has widespread corruption, if you're coming from a country that doesn't do documentation very well, and you can't figure out, okay, who's who? Do they have a criminal record? Was this person arrested and jailed for murder or rape? And if you can't figure that out in other countries, you probably shouldn't let those people in here. There are also concerns from the administration, correct and justified concerns, that people from these countries have high rates of overstaying visas. And the countries that they're coming from, for some reason, refuse to take them back if they're deported, which is a big problem. And so, okay, well, let's just not let them in to begin with. They have a couple more reasons, but those are the main ones. Those are the kind of gist of it. There is a big problem with this, though, in my opinion, in the fact that I would like this to go further. The restrictions don't apply to people who already have visas, are lawful permanent residents, or certain visa categories like diplomats or athletes, or those who serve in the U.S. interest. I would love to see this expanded to be retroactive to a bunch of people from some of these countries. Obviously not everybody, and obviously that would be very difficult to enforce, but I don't know. I'd like to see it as a policy. We're going to retroactively revoke the ability for some of these people from S-hole countries to be here. And adios, bye-bye. What I think is the most interesting stat about this is that the percentages are not that high. Lib media is freaking out about this, like, oh my gosh, how terrible it is that we are restricting the globe. You don't want to restrict the globe. If you combine the population of the 19 countries, it's approximately 488 million. If you include the 5.5-ish people that fall under the Palestinian Authority, that brings it up to like 494 million people whose ability to travel or immigrate to the United States are fully restricted. Again, oh no. If the global population around mid-December is 8.26 billion, this factors into about 6% of the world's population. 6% of people this affects. Globally speaking, we're not even talking about U.S. Globally, around the world, this affects 6% of people. I'm not entirely sure how concerned I need to be that 6% of people cannot come to the United States. One, I'm a proponent of it. I think we should, probably expand that list. That's just me. I think the list would probably go a little bit further than that. But if you're taking the lib mindset of it, this is the worst thing that's ever happened. This is terrible. Oh my gosh, how awful is this? It's 6%. The world population. Not very big there. I got to stop there. We talk too much. I talk too much. I sometimes ramble. Let me know in the comments, tbt@tbusa.com. Is there information that's not needed? Should I take some of this stuff out? I'm open and willing to hear your suggestions, comments, concerns, criticisms. Send them to tbt@tbusa.com. Also, go subscribe to our Turning Point Tonight YouTube channel. We'll be back briefly about the dating swag gap. I know that sounds ridiculous. Gen Z are kind of have a big gap between how the couples dress, but I think it's indicative of actually a bigger, probably age-old problem when it comes to relationships. We'll discuss that briefly after the break, as well as get to our mailbag section. If you'd like to be included in mailbag, tbt@tbusa.com. And if your email is vile, disgusting, bigoted, and hateful, it'll actually probably fit in great on this show. So go ahead and send it along, tbt@tbusa.com. We will be back after the break. Don't go away. Is it okay to be freaked out and impressed at the same time? This is a girl that is riding a horse stick, pretending that it is a horse, galloping around what looks like some sort of obstacle course. That's crazy. And that was an impressive jump. That was that looked like 4 feet. I don't know how tall this girl is relative to her height. That is impressive. I am simultaneously kind of worried and also thoroughly impressed. Wow. I wonder if that girl has a boyfriend. Maybe she, and I wonder if she dresses on the similar level, which is apparently a problem in the Gen Z dating culture. The swag gap, as proclaimed by the Wall Street Journal, Natasha Dangor wrote a really interesting piece about the swag gap. let me just briefly explain. I don't need to read the whole thing, 'cause again, limited on time, and I want to get to your mailbag questions. Emails. There's a huge discrepancy in so many cases of younger generations not matching the degree of style or attire with their significant other. In other words, probably the biggest one is Haley and Justin Bieber. I reckon you probably rolled your eyes at that, deservedly so. But again, this point is actually pretty interesting. Haley Bieber often dressed to the nines, photographed dressed to the nines, and her husband Justin is like in a hoodie and a black beanie and Crocs. And it's a really odd picture to see. You should go Google that. Just look up like the Biebers, and you see like Haley, who's just objectively gorgeous, dressed very, very well, and Justin was like, eh. I'm like a work from home contracted employee who doesn't care about what he looks like. Now, the main point that's being made here, and again, I want to try and keep this short, is that there is a difference in the way that couples dress in a lot of certain instances. And what they're saying, what the Wall Street Journal article is making the point of, is that actually, in a lot of ways, it exemplifies the differences in confidence in the two people in the relationship, which, without going into all of the different variables and components of this, my wife's a therapist, and we've talked about this quite a bit. Yes, it personifies itself, not personifies itself, it exemplifies itself in the form of dress. Like, you've got people that are just on these two polar opposite ways of attire. But what it really is ultimately, and the Wall Street Journal points this out, is it's a confidence difference. And that honestly is the problem with, well, younger generations, Gen Z specifically, but this has been a problem constantly with whoever the younger generation is in the dating scene. Obviously, the goal is, to get married, have a flourishing life together. But really, and my wife and I have talked about this quite a bit, what you need is two individuals who are confident in their own skin, confident of themselves, how they are, to come together to form a single union. What the Wall Street Journal is talking about, which is the problem, is that you've got somebody who's, very confident in who they are, and another person who's not at all confident in who they are. And chances are, if that person didn't come into the relationship confident in and of themselves, or at least comfortable in their own skin, you have problems. And this has been a thing that's been going on since the dawn of, dating and courtship. I would love to hear your emails, tbt@tbusa.com. Do you believe that you and your significant other came into the relationship as two concrete, confident individuals to form a powerhouse union, hopefully? Or was there some difficulty coming into the relationship? There's some statistics around the divorce rates or the breakup rates if, one person is, or if both parties are not confident, comfortable in themselves, or if just one of those two factions is, it's high. The chances of the things not working out is unfortunately fairly high. But that, at least in this modern generation coming up, is in a lot of ways exemplified through the way that they dress. But it really is an interesting problem to try and solve for the younger generation. tbt@tbusa.com. If one, you have any experience with this sort of thing and confidence and individuality while going into a relationship, or two, what are some of the best ways to help solve that problem? Every single younger generation has had this sort of an issue, again, probably since the dawn of time. I don't know, I'd love to hear from you. If you're an older couple married for a long time, what worked out for you, and how can you display that to the younger generation who's kind of, again, struggling to couple? There's a bigger problem, more statistics around that. Not necessarily time for it here, but would love to hear your thoughts. tbt@tbusa.com is the email address. We're going to get to your mailbag, comments, concerns, criticisms even. There's no criticisms today. We're not being critical today on the show. So, but if you'd like a chance to be included in the mailbag section, make sure your email is just disgusting, horrible, and vile. Chances are it'll fit in great with this show. tbt@tbusa.com. A lot of stuff to comment on today. If you'd like to send along your thoughts, comments, concerns in the email, would love to hear that. We'll be right back after the break with your mailbag emails coming up. Don't go away.
Hi, I'm Maddie, and I'm a Republican.
Hi, I'm Ariel, and I'm a Democrat.
We've been best friends for about 13 years, and we disagree on pretty much everything when it comes to politics and religion, but we both like ice cream. Granted, it's not the same kind, but it's still ice cream.
It's really not that hard to find similarities rather than differences.
True. I would agree with that. I would agree with that kind of more on like a 30,000 foot level. It is interesting, and we've quoted these a lot. That Republicans or conservatives are much more likely to have lib friends than libs are to have conservative friends. It's just kind of a stated fact. We're nicer, more confident in ourselves. We understand that, like, every at the holiday dinner table, the chances of the conservative family being much more accepting of, liberal family member, much higher than the libs who will completely excommunicate people from the family. The only thing I'd have to say here is one of you is right, one of you is wrong. So there's that. But good. I'm glad that you can eat ice cream together and, probably watch reality TV, Real Housewives of Orange County, something like that. Anyways, let's get to your mailbag questions. To the topic of the fires in California, we talked quite a bit about the corruption going on. Where did all that money go? Robert says this: couldn't the state just use the seawater to fight California fires? I understand that the salt hinders some things from being, put into effect, but in a pinch, couldn't they have used the seawater from the ocean? It's right there. I have wondered the same exact thing way before the Palisade fires happened. I've been thinking this forever. I don't know. Let us know, tbt@tbsa.com, if you know, because all of the reasons that I've been given, Robert, have been ridiculous. Like, the salt water would damage the internal workings of the pumps, the mechanic features of the pumps. They won't work. Who cares? If they just work once, that's good. Use the water from the ocean. The $1 million pump is no longer usable. Okay, fine. It didn't cause $1 billion in damage. I don't get why that's not like a system put into place. Good question, Robert. I have the same question. I'll have to summarize this, but Bonnie also writes on the topic of the president's race coming up in 26. A lot of polling data shows that one Kamala Harris, being the hypothetical lib nominee, is leading the field. To which I say, great. I mentioned a couple times on this show, when I was on the Megyn Kelly tour, Don Jr. gave his full-throated endorsement to Kamala Harris, which I think is a good thing because she will lose again. Which, fantastic. Lynn says, you're so on it tonight. Thank you, Lynn. Appreciate it. Again, talking about the corruption in California. She says she lives in San Diego with a homeless crisis and the private sector continue to be destroyed. It is so bad. Pray for us and the United States. Yeah, everybody who works on the show here lives in California. I know, I get it, but we are all hopeful that there will be a breaking point and Californians go, hey, all this stuff that we've been trying for the last couple decades is not working. Maybe we should go a different direction. But Lynn, we are with you. Dan says this on the topic of the Clintons potentially having to testify in Congress. Yes, bring Hillary in so she can thumb her nose at the American people with her infamous, what difference at this point does it make? Yeah, that's probably, Dan, you're correct. That's probably exactly what you do. Same topic. Randy says, I hope Capitol Hill has a manure spreader because silly Billy and Hillary will bring a lot of BS with them if they do, in fact, have to testify. Randy, I think that is something that infrastructurally DC will have to put in place. There will be a lot of BS. Karen says it is the exact right time that Bill and Hill have to actually... She very, very interesting point here. She's worried about their hands having to testify when they touch the Bible, burning up, spontaneously combusting. I'm not entirely sure that'll happen, but it is a good thing to watch out for. So there's that. Last email of the year. Interesting. SC says, aloha from Hawaii. We'll be out there sometime in the next couple months. Glad so much I changed channels and found Joe Bob on Turning Point tonight. Really appreciate that. Love that. Got a fave new show. Producer Glenn is elated with this, as that emails like this hopefully provide job security. So SC, appreciate that. Like I mentioned earlier on in the show, this is our last time like this engaging this year. There's going to be some changes coming in the new year, which are all good, all exciting, but we will be back here live the first week of January. In the meantime, we're obviously doing America Fest. Things are going on there, as well as several different kind of vacation fillers, which are primarily Charlie stuff. So they're going to be fascinating over the next 2 weeks. But really appreciate all of you sticking around, tuning in. We will see you in this format live in the coming year, in the new year. Until then, stay vigilant in your defense of conservative values. We will see you when we come back. God bless America. You don't get to pick fruit from public trees on public property. That's one last point. Producer Glenn reminded me earlier in the week, I think it actually might have been yesterday, that I haven't complained about my local library at all this week. And I thought, well, we've got to change that. This is a normal recurring complaint. But again, I feel like the broader topic is something worth discussing. I went to story time today. Went to our local library, did story time, the toddler story. It's great. It's fun. My daughter loves you sing some songs, you read some books. There's a bunch of kids there. It's a great time. I've talked about the fact that homeless people also shower in the bathrooms right there. For some reason, they put the room that they do all of the kids and parents right next to where the homeless meth addicts also shower. Which, there's so many different things wrong with that. One, if you're going to have that, at least separate the two. And two, maybe you don't even need to have that to begin with. But I've talked that point to death. Today, we're leaving the library, and there's a bunch of citrus trees out in the front of the library. Don't dig into that. You don't need to know which library it is. But know that it is a library. Know that, we're in Southern California-ish, so there's some citrus trees outside. See a guy picking fruit from the citrus trees and putting them in a bag. He's on the ledge, picking fruit off the trees, putting it into a bag. A bunch of people were around. Nobody was saying anything. I didn't really say anything. We didn't really have the opportunity. It's kind of distant from the actual entrance and exit the doors that we were going in. But what in the world is going on culturally and societally speaking where somebody goes, hey, I'm going to go on public property and pick all the fruit for myself? Now, obviously, the fruit has to get harvested. The city workers will probably come in and do with it what they do in the area. But you can't have that. This is one of those like slippery slope things that I think we should be so vigilant about in our own communities. It starts with one taco truck on the side of the street. They're just trying to make a living. They're just ignoring all of the health permitting that needs to take place and the very high barriers to entry in the business market, which, other people have to do. But it's okay for them because they're just one of them. All of a sudden, there's two of them. All of a sudden, then there's 5, 10, 15, 20. Then your city, your community gets overrun by people who are completely ignoring all of the rules. And because you didn't nip it in the bud, it expands. So someone, I may or may not, I won't say who, may or may not have alerted the authorities to the guy picking fruit off of the public property. Because what you can't have is somebody seeing that guy and go, oh, okay, I guess there are no rules anymore. I'll go pick fruit from the fruit trees in the public space. And all of a sudden you have a bunch of people doing their grocery shopping on the freaking fruit trees outside of this local library, further enhancing the cultural decline of the specific area. You may think, it's not that big of a deal. You shouldn't need to worry about that. It's the little things in society that end up being the catalyst to the downfall of that society. And what I see consistently when I go on, the library, but more broadly, any sort of public place, you see, it's just one person, sleeping on a park bench. It's just a couple people taking a dump in the kids' play area at the local park. It's just one. It needs to stop immediately, or else you have one person turns into two people turn into 4, then 8, then 16, then 32. I can go on. This is how society crumbles. With one little instance that sparks a bunch of different instances of people ignoring the law, and all of a sudden it's too big of a problem for the authorities to handle, and then you just accept it because you don't want to be mean. That's one of, I think, our biggest problems in this country is we just don't want to be mean. We don't want to say any of the things that are objectively true, and we don't want to look like mean people. It's not mean to want to enforce laws. It's just to want to enforce those laws. Producer Glenn, I realize I might have put you in a difficult spot here in trying to either defend or argue against any of these, but actually, sorry, viewers, it was Glenn. He was actually outside of the local library picking the grapefruits from the tree, oranges, whatever they were. Producer Glenn, your thoughts?
They were just growing all this free food. I couldn't help myself.
Yeah.
I saw it and I thought, borders don't matter, rules don't matter.
Yeah.
I'm hungry, so I'm just gonna go straight for the first thing I see, and it was those plum fruits outside the library.
Of course, that's it.
No, but like in all seriousness, I do agree. It's a cultural issue, at least I would say from what I've observed, which is, not so much public, property with food growing on it, but private property, meaning like, single family homes that have a tree that people just, walk into the yard and start plucking from. An apartment nearby, actually on my street, has, I think it's a lemon tree that people will just wander, and the gate isn't locked. And the door's not always even closed, but they'll wander on. It's clearly not public property. So even if they thought, I don't know what they think, to be quite honest, but they clearly feel welcome to, if they can take it, they will take it. And that's not, I don't know, it doesn't make me happy. I feel like it's so much easier to just go buy it at the store. And chances are it was grown professionally.
Or grow your own. We got fruit trees in our backyard.
Grow your own.
Like, you don't get to come to my backyard and take it. Like,
there's seeds. Like, you're saving at best $1 or $2 from just buying it yourself when you go grocery shopping.
Yeah, but it's not even about that. It's more about
guarantee your EBT will cover it.
But it's not even about that. It's about the principle of like, look, you can't have just a horde of people coming in to, whatever it is, pick the fruits, set up, food vendor stations. Like there are all of the rules. The rules are there for a reason, and sometimes the rules feel mean, but whenever somebody takes away the rules, you realize why the rules were there to begin with. And like this is the whole problem with places like California. It's like, well, it's difficult for people to acquire a food handler's permit. It's difficult for people to, rent out a space, and okay, fine. Take those barriers, I don't know, make it easier for people to rent out places. Make the food handler's license process more streamlined so it doesn't take a year to actually get your license to be able to open your restaurant. But what you can't do is just ignore it to begin with, just on its face, just come, we don't worry about that right now. Because then you have just, you turn into a third world hellhole, and then you realize why all of the rules were there to begin with. And again, this goes in so many different instances. Fruit, obviously, is it at the top of the priority for the PD in the area to go take care of that? No.
I was gonna say, I'm guessing they still haven't responded priority-wise to your call.
And I didn't even,
as someone who frequently, and my fruit picking issue may be parking on a very busy street that people often abuse the rules on. And those calls that I, or someone I know might be making, they often are the lowest priority for any responding officer, and they respond, but it's clearly not the biggest deal. But it's indicative of a bigger cultural problem, I think, where rules don't matter, red zones don't matter. Changing your oil on the street, being parked there for multiple days on end without moving, I could just go on. It doesn't matter. And it's like, well, it kind of does, because we all share this. It's like a community parking zone. It's there for a reason, and it's not for you to have long-term parking.
No man is an island entire unto himself. For who the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. Go look up that poem if you'd like to understand the broader context of what society means and operating within, what the person next to you does actually does matter to you and your lifestyle. Fun. Producer Glenn, thank you so much. This is, I think this is going to be our one last point of the year. So
unless we do one at AmFest.
It's possible. depending on how it is that we actually structure the way we're doing this. For peek behind the scenes, we're not entirely sure what we're doing at America Fest tomorrow, because mostly it's there's so many different variables at these events. Sometimes they go long, and sometimes the TV still stays on the actual event, which is totally fine and probably should do. But other times it ends on time. Sometimes it ends on time, and therefore we'll be on hopefully be on the RAV stage and doing it live from Phoenix, Arizona. If you're not coming to America Fest, I can't say you should come, because you can't, because it's been sold out for months. But if you are coming, it'll be a fantastic event. It'll also be streaming, I believe, on Rumble and also on Real America's Voice throughout the entire.
A few other platforms will carry it as well. Almost any big conservative media outlet will probably have it, but definitely Turning Point's channels will be airing what's going on.
Yep. So, all right. Well, appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll see you in the new year. God bless America.